The Devil All the Time, the new Netflix film directed by Antonio Campos, based on the novel by the same name by Donald Ray Pollock. If you watched my trailer reaction, you'll remember that I said something along the lines of, this story felt like something Steinbeck may have written if it had balls. And oh, what big balls this story has. I'd like to put a disclaimer here that because I did read the novel, it is difficult for me to separate my opinion from the knowledge I have in the reading to the watching of the movie, but I did my very best to try to watch this through the eyes of someone who wasn't very familiar with the story, to see if the director brought this world to life, the actors brought these characters to life, and if the whole thing was confusing, because it is kind of a complicated story. I shouldn't say complicated, but there's a lot of moving pieces. All right, and because I read the book, I'm gonna have another spoilery section at the very end of this. So if you have read the book or you are curious about reading the book and what the differences are between the film, hang out to the very end and we'll talk about it. All right, let's talk about The Devil All the Time. This movie is a Southern Gothic tale that involves a large cast of characters and how all those characters touch each other's lives and the events that unfold, of which some are good and some are bad, but they're mostly bad. It takes place mostly in a small town in West Virginia called Knock'em-Stiff. I mean, that name, that is a real place. Reality is stranger than fiction indeed. It spans decades, specifically from around 1945 to 1965. That is the world you're going to immerse yourself into while watching this film. And I think at its core, it's about the monsters that we face in life and even the monsters we become, the difficult choices we have to make and how those choices affect others, not only them personally, but the people that surround them, and how those effects just ripple across time to potentially devastating and tragic ends. So this really isn't a story about a character who wants something that we center around. It's really about all of these characters. Now we do have a connective thread who is portrayed by Tom Holland as Arvin Russell, who is not even born at the beginning of the film, but we get to see him grow up and become a man and how he affects everybody around him and everybody around him affects him. And it's just this intricate knot of consequences. So really it's a dark road with branching paths of tragedy that loop back in on themselves and all come to a head, for better or worse, but mostly worse. And I think one line in the film says it best. It's said by Sebastian Stan's character, Chief Bodecker, when he says, "Some people were born just so they can be buried." What did I think? Well, let's start off with the best part of the entire film, and that is the performances. And yes, I have a paper. There are a lot of names, so let's take these one by one. It's such a great cast, and all of them did a great job. I'm not going to go through every single cast member here, but just the main ones that I felt were the most notable and more integral to the story. Mr. Robert Pattinson as Preston Teagarden. Now, he did probably the best job, I feel, out of all of the characters. He could have gone full caricature. He could have gone exactly what you would think from a crazy Southern preacher. But when he's on the pulpit and he's delivering his sermon, and in every scene he's in, he is just so calculated. It's almost like he's ready to explode. You can just see that spirit and that fire in him ready to burst, but he keeps tugging it back down, and just that level of control and that nuance to character, I loved it. He didn't have very many scenes in this film, and I think that's one of the most impressive things about all of the actors actually is everybody except Tom Holland's character doesn't have that much screen time, but man, did they bring these characters to life. Next on the list, that brings to Tom Holland, who played Arvin Russell. Another fantastic job. He played this understated kind of tough guy with a troubled past and a broken family history. I believed he was Arvin Russell. The youngest Skarsgård, Mr. Bill Skarsgård as Willard Russell, Arvin's father. He also, I really enjoy his performances. He has such range, and this is no exception. Even though Bill Skarsgård has a very boyish face, he embodied this character. You could see the fire behind his eyes. You could see just the demons he was wrestling with from his past in the war. All right, Haley Bennett as Charlotte Russell. She did a great job. I loved her in Swallow. If you have seen that film, if you haven't, great film, check it out. She played what you'd expect as kind of like a southern sweetheart, really shy, but brings the emotion with the care and the love for Willard and Arvin. Riley Keough as Sandy Henderson, one of our darkest yet conflicted characters. She plays a used and troubled woman very well here, and is a great companion to Jason Clarke, who plays Clark Henderson. And finally, Sebastian Stan, who played Lee Bodecker, one of our many villains in this story, did a great job, gained a little weight for the part, and as I said earlier, spoke one of my favorite lines in the film. Now, the structure and the narrative, like I said, we go across many years, 2 decades, and we're dipping in and out of these characters' lives. We get to see how everything connects, what influences the other, how all of these timelines just intersect and collide with each other, and how one character who you may not think affects another hits them further down the road. It's not necessarily like Traffic or a film like that where all these you have all these aha moments at the end where, oh, this guy helped this guy and look how it all came to be. And the film has a great opening when you see these bold white letters on a black background, and within those white letters you can see all the film grain. It really sets the stage. And then we are treated to the author himself doing a voiceover introducing us to this time and these people as we drop down on an overhead map, slowly lowering into Knockemstiff and the events that unfold there. And speaking of the voiceover, now when we're being introduced to this film, and I understand why it was there to help the audience understand the motivations of these characters, their inner thoughts, but I don't think it was needed. And unfortunately, that was my least favorite part of the movie. And man, it really broke my heart when I saw the credits roll and I saw that Donald Ray Pollock played the narrator, the author himself, and it was my least favorite part of the film. The performance is fantastic, and he has this southern grit that just fit right into everything. It's like this grandfatherly tone of a wise man telling you this entire story, but it was not needed. The actors were able to convey subtext and inner thoughts without it. I tried to mentally block out the voice as I was watching this some of the time to see if like it was really necessary, and I don't believe it was, and it really pulled me out of the whole experience. I don't know if this was the director's choice or if it was something that he got pressure from the producers. And that is the challenge of this narrative. Like I said, there's a lot of players, it's a lot of time, there's a lot of story beats you have to hit. 2 hours and 18 minutes is just not enough time. This would have been much better served as a miniseries, something that you had like 8 to 10 hours to digest, to explore, because while they were extremely faithful to this novel, there was very few things they changed in the overall story or the characters. It was just rapid fire, and I tried to think of this as viewing it for the first time, having no clue on what I was seeing, and I could imagine it being very confusing. Now, those of you who haven't read the book and did find it confusing, I would love to hear it. Or if you didn't, I'd really love to hear it, because maybe I'm completely wrong here. And this wasn't the only device, the narration, to hopefully clue the viewer into what was going on and give them more context. But there are quick cuts of flashbacks and characters' memories, and there's lines of dialogue that just speak volumes, that give you enough, I believe, to understand what's going on and why these characters are doing the things they're doing. And all of those are way more subtle approaches than having a godlike narrator literally tell you the thoughts of these characters. And I think really the director bit off more than he can chew. I think it's a fantastic adaptation though, and the constraints of a 2-hour movie just weren't enough. And while he did an amazing job bringing all of those story elements within that compacted time frame, it did feel a bit rushed. It did feel like maybe it would have benefited from certain other things being cut. I don't know. It's really tough to know what would have been the best solution here. All I know is the narration was not great. Let's talk about another good thing about the film. I don't want to be bagging on it the entire time. The score. Now, it had this theme that is very present in the trailer, but what's great about it is it's repeated across the film, but not the same. It's different instrumentation, it's different tempos, and they all give you a different vibe and are just very appropriate for the scene that they're in. And I love that fact. Rather than having like a a very sweeping score with a huge variety of instrumentation and moods. They took this very minimal theme, and the score is minimal throughout. I don't want you to think it's like Star Wars or something where you feel like there's an orchestra playing behind you the whole time. It's used expertly in just the right moments and just the right sounds, even though it was so understated. It goes without saying that this film is extremely violent. They do not pull any punches, and I commend the director for letting those decisions go. I commend Netflix for allowing them to happen as well. You really can't tell this story without the violence, without the dark, dark things that happen. And I'm really glad to see Netflix in this realm again. As I mentioned in my trailer reaction, the film Beasts of No Nation is akin to the same kind of tonality. All right, so should you watch it? Yes, I think that anyone can get something out of this film. It's not perfect by any means, but the performances alone are worth watching this for. The tragic story that just has so many layers to it is worth watching. The character work is deep despite how many characters there are, how little screen time each one of them gets. I can't say it enough how impressed I am by the cast here and what they did in this short amount of time. And if you like something like, let's say, True Detective Season 1, where it's just dark and gritty and hopeless and bleak, you will really enjoy, at the very least, the tone of this film. But that said, if you're squeamish, if you have any issues with rape, animal cruelty, gore, anything within that realm, you should probably steer clear of this. This film does not pull punches. It is not for the faint of heart. It's not gratuitous. Everything that happens in this film felt like a natural progression of the characters and the scenes and the events and all of that together. It is 2 hours and 18 minutes of the most hopeless and bleak story that I've seen in a long time. But there are rays of hope. There is vengeance. Some people definitely do get what they deserve. Other people don't. But I think that really is what this story is about. Like, the world is not perfect. The world is pretty ugly and dirty at times. And this really reminds you that there are monsters around every corner. Bad things happen to good people no matter what. Now for the score. I'm going to have to give The Devil All the Time a 7 out of 10. Amazing performances across the board. They really realized this setting and this tone. The writer and the director were not afraid to take this to the very darkest of places and never hold back, being very true to the source material. But the narration and the heavy-handedness of explaining to the audience what was going to happen or what was happening or what the thought process of these characters were really took me out of the moment. I just feel like this story needed more time. Yes, the devil needed more time. But once again, I have to commend the director and Netflix and the writer. You guys all did something very amazing. I can't imagine this being done any better within the short amount of time, minus the narration. And while it didn't feel like a completely perfect movie to me, it's completely serviceable and enjoyable, and I encourage people to check it out for themselves. So Antonio Campos, thank you. The cast, thank you for bringing this, one of my favorite novels, to life. Of course, the man, Donald Ray Pollock, for creating this world, because none of this would have been possible without you. Thank you for watching. And as you know, I'm a writer, so if you would like to see me create and not just critique, check out my series Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000-word short story on the spot based on a piece of artwork. If you're into storytelling or writing, I think you'd really enjoy it. Thanks again for watching. Read the book. Please read this book. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. All right. I'm guessing if you're still here, you've either read the book or have seen the movie and want to see what the similarities between the book and the movie are, what the differences are, what my opinions of those things are, what I liked, what I didn't like, etc., etc. So here we go. And if you're here by accident, please turn back now. You're about to be spoiled. So speaking of changes, now Roy and Theodore, one of the most interesting characters, and it's hard to say most interesting. Everybody in this whole cast was interesting, and that must have been the hugest struggle, is giving these characters enough time and knowing like where to truncate their stories, what to cut. And unfortunately, Roy and Theodore's story was cut. If you've read the novel, you know those guys, once they killed Helen, and then they fled on the road and got up to all kinds of crazy escapades. They were just kind of with a traveling circus or a carnival for a time, just barely living on the road. And then finally, Theodore dies a very sad death underneath a tree when his brother finds him with ants crawling all over him. And Roy decides to go back home and see the daughter that he left behind. Meanwhile, he is picked up by Sandy and Clark, and that's what killed me the most, is how they had him die, which did happen in the book, but it happened, I felt, much later when it all made sense. You know, we got these scenes where we're seeing what they're doing and all the hardship that they're suffering, and you know, we think they're these trashy people that are just brainwashed by religion because, you know, he killed his wife and abandon his family. But then as we learn about them more and see what they're going through, we start to understand them and even feel sorry for them. And then it's just a knife in your chest when he finally gets killed by our two serial killers. And it was a great arc for his character. And unfortunately, they weren't able to capture that in the film because there just wasn't enough context there to have his death have any weight. And one thing that I really love that the director captured is just the small details that I really loved about the book. How when Arvin's dad gets in that fight after he's kind of telling him, hey, you need to stick up for yourself, and they're sitting in the truck, and he says something along the lines of, there's a lot of bad people in the world, and Arvin looks over and he says, more than 100. I mean, that is such a great line, and it captures just the innocence and the ignorance of youth, and I thought it was a great scene, and I'm glad they included it. And obviously, one of the grosser scenes, but it was great, was when Lee was getting jerked off by the woman in his car and into the cup. And when he says, "Oh, you got it all in the cup," I think people may have missed that because it was subtle, but it was very apparent in the novel, and that was a scene that they could have just completely omitted, but they put it in there, and as insignificant as it felt, I feel like it really contributed to the overall feeling of this film. And why did Lee find the photos so soon about what Clark and his sister were up to? I didn't understand that. I felt like it still would have made more sense in the context of the film if he found them on the dead bodies after Arvin killed both of them. I didn't really see a need for that, and when it first popped up, I was like, okay, there's going to be a reason why this happens earlier, and I didn't feel like narratively that it made any sense or was any better than what really happened in the novel. But when he did find those film canisters and take them back to the house or the apartment, and I thought that was an amazing way to display that stuff in negative form. It just had a much more creepy vibe to it. Rather than seeing the developed photos, we have just these zoomed in shots of these negatives, and it was just so damn evil looking, and I really loved that touch there. And one of the scenes that was changed was when Teagarden and Arvin are having a conversation in the chapel. That actually happened, I believe, in a car in the novel. But I thought the film version was much better because here comes in Arvin. He doesn't really know who he is, Teagarden. And in the form of a confession, he's recounting the acts of this evil guy and what he did to his sister and other women as well. And the location was perfect. The posture was perfect when you had Robert Pattinson just kind of casually leaning over the pew. Arvin with his hat over his eyes. I thought that was perfect and in fact better than the novel. And the last thing I think I want to talk about is how I'm pretty sure the very beginning of the novel we're introduced to Arvin and his father at the prayer log. And then we go back in time and forward in time later on, but in this film we didn't start there, and because the film ends there, as the book ends there, I felt like it would have been a perfect bookend to just, you know, complete the arc, complete the story, have a great callback, everything comes full circle. And I'm curious why the director made that decision. Maybe it was because they wanted to be more chronological, just to not confuse the audience further. But I don't know. That's my best guess. If you've read the novel, I'd love to hear your thoughts below after seeing the film. Do you feel like I do? Do you feel like it got so close but just so far at the same time? While it captured the characters and the setting and all of those things, it just fell short because of, I think, the constraints they had to work with and that damn narration that killed me. But if you disagree with me, I would love to hear it. Just like I said, keep in mind, give a little space in the comments. Don't spoil it for anybody else. Thanks for sticking around for this long. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. And thank you for watching as always. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.